moment, I'm going to introduce you to the guests. I think you probably know who they are and what they do, but we'll go through that. But I just briefly wanted to explain to you why we've organised the meeting and what the format of the evening is going to be. So Chipping Barnet for Europe is a grassroots volunteer organisation that has been campaigning for the last 2.5 years to remain in the European Union. We believe unequivocally and unapologetically that all of the residents of our constituency, of our borough, of our city, and of our country are better off in the European Union. One of the things about this school that people may not know is this building was built 9 years ago, and it was built actually to a very special plan. The previous headmaster believed a lot, you'll have seen on the doors, about inspiring people. So they've built it in such a way that the library overlooks the whole of the City of London, and it's quite an amazing site. And I believe it's the same for the sixth form common room as well. And what the school was designed to do on purpose was to inspire kids to have aspiration and to have opportunity. And we believe that these kids here, we believe that our kids, we believe that your kids all have far more opportunity as citizens of the European Union for all of its faults. The reason we're here tonight, though, is that for the last 2.5 years, we've been campaigning at a grassroots level. We've been on the streets, we asked people to go to marches, we've organised events, we've supported the LSE in doing surveys on impacts of Brexit in Barnet, etc., etc., etc. In the last few months, we've started working really successfully with the other pro-Remain groups in our borough. So by that I mean Barnet Lib Dems and Barnet Greens. We ourselves are non-politically aligned. We have members from all political parties and people who've never been involved in politics at all. But on this one issue, we have come together and we are working, I think, very successfully together. So what we wanted to do was understand, we're doing this at a grassroots level, what's happening at a national level, and how can we connect with the people to my left who are leading the Unite to Remain approach across the country. We didn't set this out to be Newsnight. We didn't set this out to be a hustings for an up-and-coming local election. This is about how we join our grassroots with our national campaigns to Unite to Remain. And so it gives me huge pleasure to invite these, I'm going to be very partisan, amazing politicians who are sat next to me this evening. So Heidi Allen, as I think you all know, is an MP for South Cambridgeshire and is prominent in leading the National Unite to Remain campaign. Luciana Berger sat next to her as the MP for Liverpool Wavertree and has recently joined the Lib Dems. Heidi, I should have said, sits in the Independence group. Sian Berry is the co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. And Luisa Porritt is one of our Lib Dem members of the European Parliament and also the deputy leader of the Lib Dem group there. So thank you all so much for giving up your time. I know they're spending days and days and hours, even with Parliament closed when it shouldn't be, doing this sort of thing. So we really appreciate them coming this far north. The format for the evening is very simple. We've asked them all to think about 3 questions. What should we be doing at a local level to Unite to Remain? Why have we got to where we are? It's probably the first question. What should we be doing to do something about that? And the third question is for them to share with us what they're doing at the national level and what they're going to continue to do. So I'm going to ask each of the speakers in turn to give a short address, a short answer to those questions, and to give you their views on what they think is most important. You'll be very pleased to know that they all said that they want to talk less and listen to you more. So what we're going to do as soon as they're finished basically is open up the floor to questions. So it's really going to be an open mic session. We've got a couple of roving mics, or there's a roving Dirk and a roving David somewhere. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We will come to you, and we'll try and deal with as many questions as we possibly can. If you want to ask an individual member of the panel, please do. If you'd like to put it across the panel, also, please feel free to do that. Just one set of ground rules, if I may. There are a couple of things that are okay, and there's something that's definitely not okay. We all know, we've been practicing this for 3 years, that we're not all going to agree about Brexit, and that's okay. We all know that people have very strongly felt views about Brexit, and that's okay. But what's not okay is any behaviour that goes beyond the bounds of what we would call common decency. We don't want people calling out, we don't want any heckling, we don't want anybody trying to talk over anybody else. We're sorry to have to say that, but we all know this particular debate gets very heated. If that does happen, we will ask the person to leave. Okay. But I shall now shut up and get on with the evening. So once again, in such unpredictable times, I'll repeat the questions we've asked our speakers to go through, and then we'll kind of go down the line, starting with Heidi. So why are we here? How did we get where we are? What do they think people like us should be doing? And what are they doing that we should know about? So Heidi, over to you.
Thank you. Now, first question, am I on? Yeah. I'm on. Thank you for setting those ground rules. If you could jot those down for us, I think Luciana and I would probably be quite grateful to have those in the House of Commons as well. Because that whole not talking over each other, we're less good at that. No, we're good. Well, clearly we're good. But it can get pretty rowdy in there, it's fair to say. So thank you very much, first and foremost, for inviting us tonight. So where are we? Excellent question. I thought I'd start with some negatives about where we are and then move on to some positives about where I think we are. And I would imagine we'll hear a lot of that echoing from the panel following me. So, negatives. We are nearer 31st of October. There is no denying the clock that has been extended already is ticking. We are still at a position of impasse within the House of Commons. There is nothing yet that has successfully brought us together and therefore a plan for the country. We have a new Prime Minister. And if you're anything like me, you don't quite yet understand how you were able to wake up one day and not really understand how that front bench got there, other than how the hell did that happen? Yeah. We have a kamikaze Prime Minister, with a kamikaze but a highly intelligent sidekick in Mr. Cummings, who seemed to me to be prepared to throw out the rule of law and practically anything else that gets in their way. And whatever your views might have been on Theresa May, she was somebody who followed the book when it came to constitutional principles and respecting the role of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. That was never in doubt, but we are literally in very, very different territory now. And it seems to me we have a Prime Minister who is actively pushing for no deal. Not something, again, that Theresa May was. And the fact that Amber Rudd has finally come out not just to resign her position on Cabinet, but also the whip, because she recognised how little, if any, work was going into finding any kind of deal, revealed to her the harsh truth that this Prime Minister is more than content to take us crashing out with no deal at all. But there are some positives. And there have been a lot of positives, actually, in the last week or two. I think the tide is finally turning in favour of those of us that will do anything to stop us leaving no deal and want to remain. So we got a bill through. We got a bill through to stop no deal and to mandate the Prime Minister to ask for an extension to Article 50 if there is no deal. Whether he'll abide by that, more on that later, I'm sure. We have 21 free Tories. Who knew I was setting such a fashion statement back in February? Felt quite lonely at the time, I can tell you. But it appears to be the hottest thing now, being an independent Tory or an independent. And those 21 free numbers, when it came to getting that bill through, that's what made all the difference. 21 Tories who resigned the whip like I did that have said, you know what, this isn't good enough. This party is only looking after itself and not the country's first interest. We had an emergency debate this week, Operation Yellowhammer. We've demanded that the government hand over their documentation on what no deal will mean for the country. And this isn't the civil service interpretation, this is government's own papers. Now, I've got a view that I don't think we've perhaps seen everything. It felt like a very short document and not that different from the one that was leaked by the press a while ago. But nonetheless, there's stuff out there now, and I think the public, if they were in any doubt as to what no deal might mean, wow, it's there for all to see now. We had some success in the Scottish courts. So I and Luciana, we both had our names on the Section 24, the emergency debate. I also had my name on the Scottish case, I think Luciana did too, which was successful. It will go to the Supreme Court on Tuesday, but the Scottish court, and there was no conspiracy theory, it's just that they were open during the summer. So that's the reason we chose the Scottish courts, time being kind of precious. And they have agreed that they believe that the Prime Minister has acted unlawfully by proroguing Parliament. We have managed to delay a general election because we're not scared of it, but we all know that if the government asks and demands that general election, then they get to control the timetable of that general election, which would have given Boris carte blanche to pick the date and therefore potentially still get us out with no deal. And the best thing of all is us Remainers are getting more organised. Right. Which brings me on to the Unite to Remain initiative. So Luciana and I will think back fondly to our happy time in Change UK. TIG. Was it TIG? No, the happy times with TIG, you're right. Change UK, the European elections. If I had £1 for every time somebody had said to me, when the polling shifted, do you remember? And the Lib Dems and the local elections and the Greens had done particularly well, and the polling for us dramatically changed. If I had £1 for every time somebody had said to me, Heidi, why can't the Remain parties get their act together? You're going to split the vote. The Brexit party, they're together, they're going to return more seats than we are. And there just wasn't time because those elections came on us so quickly. But we know that general election is coming, so now there is time. So I've formed an organisation called Unite to Remain, which is essentially working with the Remain parties and the independent MPs across England and Wales to see whether it's possible to have one backed Unite to Remain candidate in as many seats across England and Wales as will make a difference if we don't split the Remain vote. So you'll know the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election just recently. Well, that was our test case. And didn't it work?
Yeah.
Precious, precious narrow majority. But hats off to the Green Party and Plaid Cymru. I can't tell you how refreshing, after my time in the Conservative Party, to see parties, country first, professional, compromising, working together, not for themselves, but the national interest. And I have to say, absolute hats off to them that were able to do it in Brecon. Because this takes courage. And it takes, an unswerving determination to think, no, what's the long ball game here? Country first. And I am really hopeful and optimistic that we might be able to recreate that. We're having good conversations. My goal is around about 100 seats. So that when that general election comes, we will have Unite to Remain focused, well-financed, campaigning candidates in those seats. And then what might be possible? We could return with the SNP something in the region of 150 Remain MPs to the House of Commons. So if we haven't managed to get the legislation through for second referendum by then, just think how that might shift the dynamic. So what can you do? If you're in political parties, take that deep breath. Wherever you live, your candidate may not be who you would like to be your candidate. It may not be your party. Eyes on the prize. Compromise. This is about the national interest. We're not going to be bedfellows forever, I'm sure of that. But for this most important general election when it comes, we have to work together. And I am confident that people can do that because they see what might be achievable here. So just to wrap up, 2 thoughts from me on terms of what might happen next. Well, it's all to do with when that general election might come. Tom Watson, interestingly, came out and said that he thinks, I think he's right, that a general election wouldn't give us an instant solution. It's not going to suddenly magic away the Brexit impasse that we're in. So if Boris Johnson tries to bring a deal and amend a deal, I don't know what he's going to do to it. Maybe he'll change the font, try and suggest, maybe a really small font. It's changed, and convince the RG. If that deal does come back to the House of Commons, might now be the time to attach a People's Vote amendment to it. 2 new people have come out, 2 new MPs, Oliver Letwin and Antoinette Sambach today. So we're starting to feel confident that there are now the numbers to get it over the line. Or we have that general election, and through the Unite to Remain project, we return a significant number of Remain MPs that then can ensure we get that second referendum through the House of Commons. So in summary, it's not over yet, but there are reasons to be cheerful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Luciana, please.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. It's so lovely to be with all of you here this evening. It's especially nice to be on an all-female panel. It doesn't happen often. I prepared a lot this evening to discuss about the why, because I think it's important in any introduction to discuss how it is we've got to where we've got to. And there is just so much detail, and I think any one of us could speak for an hour about where we are. But I'll perhaps give you my reflection on where we are and how we've got to where we are today. And I'm so grateful that we've got the opportunity also to discuss about what comes next and the kind of practical steps and what we can all do together. Because any one of us by ourselves is not going to change this, and elected individuals, whether it's in the European Parliament and councils in Parliament, again, we can't do this by ourselves, and we're only going to really make a difference, I think, collectively if we all put our collective might into making a difference going forward. So this is very much a shared endeavour, and I'm only sorry that we're sat behind a table here because, again, I anticipate from the clap so far on the same side. So, and if I reflect on where we are today, I mean, there are so many pressing issues facing our country, so many of them. And again, each of us in our own different ways see that as constituency MPs, as European parliamentarians. The pressing issues around our NHS, around the challenges around mental health, knife crime, the increasing rise in religious, racial, and political intolerance. And yet, one issue has dominated our politics for such a long time, and that is, of course, Brexit. It's dominated our public discourse. It's sucked the oxygen out of our political conversations. And too often, and I think, again, it's evidenced by the introduction that you had to give, it's created a very brittle, angry, and intolerant tone in our public life. And I really regret that, and that we are where we are today. It's undermined our parliamentary democracy, and it's also polarised our communities. And we only have to look at the increase in the amount of race hate crimes that we're seeing. It's a very, very serious state of affairs. It's created a toxic culture, and we're seeing that increase in hatred and xenophobia. And I think the greatest tragedy of all is that it was entirely avoidable. And I don't want to look back too much, but if we look back to 2016, it was a referendum called by David Cameron to stem the tide of Euroscepticism in his party. And how did that work out? Well, it didn't, did it? And I say that on the eve of actually David Cameron's about, as I understand it, going to be publishing his book on Monday. So I won't be rushing out to buy that in a hurry.
It's like the new Margaret Atwood.
It was a campaign that I know that David Cameron thought he could win, but then didn't put the effort into that. And he didn't win. He was wrong. And it was dominated by a Leave campaign that has now been found to have broken the law in order to win. And you have to look at the most recent documentary on Netflix to see just some of the evidence of why that is. And yet that's been put to one side, and we've had 3 years of Brexit, which has led us to where we are now. And I don't think that, particularly in recent decades, we've seen a nation ever contemplate such a degree of self-inflicted damage, because that's what it is. I don't think a government has ever pursued a course which is going to make its citizens poorer, is going to reduce opportunities for the next generation, again, relevant as we sat here in a school, and it's going to make it difficult for our businesses to prosper. And if you watched the 6 o'clock news last week, and when they took businesses, small and medium enterprises, through the checklist that they've got to do in order to prepare for this no-deal Brexit, they're floundering because no one's told them anything. It's in a few weeks' time, and they're not prepared in any way, shape or form for what's coming down the line. And then if you look at how the world looks upon us, not just our European neighbours, but again, there's been some documentaries on Radio 4 and on the BBC about how the world sees us, and it's a combination of pity and contempt. That's not the proud nation that we should, that we should be outward facing. And even if we did vote to leave the EU, as many of sometimes our friends, our families, our neighbours might have done, again, I don't say this lightly, but no one signed up for the chaos and the damage of a no-deal Brexit. Even if you were beguiled by the promises of more money for the NHS, or entranced by the idea of taking back control, I don't believe anyone voted for recession, I don't believe anyone voted for bankruptcy, I don't believe anyone voted to see our Parliament's doors closed. I don't believe anyone voted for medicine shortages, for empty shelves in our supermarkets, or to be poorer. And yet this is where Boris Johnson is leading us with such abandon. Because, again, it's astounding what he has managed to not achieve, but to what he's done in recent weeks. He's made it clear that it's no deal or bust, and that there's no one who can stand in his way, not the opposition, not his own MPs, he's prepared to throw them out if he has to, not Parliament. And I think the Prime Minister's decision to suspend Parliament, as we've seen in the last few weeks, will stand as one of the most dangerous and damaging actions of the past decade, if not longer. That's why, as a Member of Parliament, we had just 2 days before summer recess. In fact, it was 1 day, forgive me, just 1 day in which Boris Johnson made a statement to Parliament and Jacob Rees-Mogg, as the leader of the House, took questions. And I took my opportunity to ask him, the only question I got called for was of Jacob Rees-Mogg to say, will he be bringing Parliament back? Because even then we knew that we wanted to see our Parliament open during the course of the summer. So in terms of how things have evolved and shifted, Heidi talked about it, and perhaps I can give some more examples of where we are working cross-party. And I worked over the course of the summer with a number of MPs, particularly Stephen Doughty, who's a Labour Member of Parliament. We coordinated the letter, which saw over 150 MPs sign it at the height of summer when it was difficult to get hold of them, to say, bring back Parliament now. That was in the middle of August. We then coordinated the Church House Declaration. And for anyone that may or may not have seen that, we've now got close to 250 MPs that have signed that have said, we must defend our democracy. And what a horrific state of affairs that we find ourselves in, that we should even have to have done that, to have come together, again, in what was supposed to be the summer recess, to say that in the event that the Prime Minister would pursue prorogation, we would do everything possible to make sure that our constituents' voices and the people of this country's voices can and will be heard, because we want to protect our parliamentary democracy. Little did we know that the next day would be the announcement from Boris Johnson that he was going to essentially shut down Parliament just to stifle any debate and to pursue his course of no-deal Brexit. And again, many of us have spoken up for a people's vote, for a referendum with Remain on the ballot paper so people's voices can be heard. And again, we argued against prorogation. And it's absolutely absurd that our Parliament should have even put up that clothesline. I mean, the scenes, that word scenes. I had so many people message me to say, they couldn't believe what they were watching when we were in Parliament until it was about 2 o'clock in the morning the other night. That, you saw all of those Tory MPs file out behind all these ministers to go over to the House of Lords to support this prorogation, knowing full well that the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them didn't accept or believe that that's what should be happening, and yet they were prepared to do so. And part of the challenge of what we've seen from all sides in Parliament, and I don't say this lightly, is about leadership and about public office. And I think, when Heidi and I took the decision to leave our parties, it's because we believed in the national interest. We had to stand up for, particularly on this issue of Brexit, we had to do what was right for our constituents and what was right for the country. And again, too often we're seeing too much evidence of people that are bound by the tribalness of their parties and are not prepared to put their heads above the parapet. They put their heads in the sand, they put their fingers in their ears. And that's fine, but it's not fine when you're one of 650 MPs and you've got a responsibility to the country. So we've seen the Yellowhammer reports, and I know other colleagues are going to talk about that. I perhaps won't reflect on that too much. Only to say that today, Michael Gove has tried to say that I was wrong last night on Peston when I sought to draw attention to the fact that the Yellowhammer report, which if anyone has seen it that was released, says that it was Her Majesty's Government reasonable worst case planning assumptions. And in fact, the journalist who disclosed this and published this in the Sunday Times a few weeks ago, when she got a copy of this exact document, it said the base case scenario. And in terms of one of the things, nothing's changed. And in terms of, I will pursue him because he's sought to dispel that on Twitter today. And he's the one that's not telling the truth, not me. So, we're trying to hold these ministers to account, but they keep on repeating, I'll say it, lies. They're repeating lies in terms of what they have said and done so far. We've seen Jacob Rees-Mogg dismiss, what was contained within the Yellowhammer report and attack those of us that have warned people. He has arrogantly been lounging when really he should have been sitting up and listening. And the seriousness of this, we can talk again about Dr. David Nicholl, attacking our medical professionals, attacking our judges, as we've seen, in this very serious state of affairs. So at the moment, we're obviously waiting until what happens next Tuesday with a Supreme Court ruling. We're looking to that. We don't know yet what will be the outcome of that. It was incredibly significant that it was not one, not two, but 3 separate judges came to the conclusion that they did. In fact, I was just actually going to reflect. I mean, if you think about what will be written in the history books of just the past week alone, the list of what has happened of a Prime Minister that's shut down Parliament, who has wanted to exploit the government website to target and personalise data, who is misleading the public about duty-free shopping, abusing the Treasury Twitter. Again, 3 judges in Scotland finding the government's decision to prorogue Parliament being unlawful. They've misled the Queen. I mean, anyone that saw the front page of the Mirror newspaper today, I mean, who would have thought that we'd ever see something like that on the front pages of one of our newspapers? We had to see the Lord Chancellor take to Twitter to defend our judiciary, an extraordinary state of affairs. We've had other ministers not say whether they would uphold the rule of law and then say they would be deferring to human rights legislation to determine whether or not they would be complying with the law, which is the first time I've ever heard Conservative MPs defer to human rights legislation. I mean, the list goes on. I can't read my writing, but there's so many different things about what's happened. And they've shut down Parliament. And they've shut down Parliament also when there's been bills that have not completed their passage through Parliament, really important bills around domestic violence and domestic abuse, around immigration. You know, we should have been questioning ministers this week, ministers in the Department for Culture, Media, Sport, Treasury ministers, Attorney General, you name it. And yesterday, we should have had PMQs. And the Prime Minister should have been in front of the liaison committee. So PMQs, you get your one question as the backbench MPs, but the liaison committee is the committee of all the select committee chairs where they get to come back on the Prime Minister and they get to really properly hold him to account. And he promised that even in the event of prorogation, he would come before the liaison committee, and then he prorogued Parliament and he reneged on his promise. And what did he do instead? He did a Facebook Prime Minister question from his bunker in Downing Street at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, for all of, I think it was 15, 20 minutes. I mean, that's not how we hold our Prime Minister to account. And it's clear that he's very much afraid of scrutiny and he doesn't want to face those tough questions. And we have lots of questions to ask, and I've got a whole raft of them, but I'm not going to go into the detail. But in particular, I just reflect on one very, very specific issue, is the availability of insulin. And I do so having just received overnight an email from a constituent who, on behalf of his son, is genuinely concerned about the availability of insulin. And it's not, again, it's not Project Fear. This is already, there will be people in this audience who are struggling to see their full prescriptions dispensed. Either you're getting delays, or I can see some people nodding, or you're being told to come back, or you're getting half of it now, or some just, it's just not available, or you're being asked to go back to the GP and get a different prescription because the drug that you have been initially prescribed is not available. So people are getting lesser treatments, or perhaps not the treatment that's best suited to their condition. This is what's happening now, and it is because of Brexit, having listened very closely to the pharmacy sector and to GPs as well. So I think as this panel shows, and as your presence shows, we're not prepared to roll over. As Heidi has said, there has been so much more work going on, and it has, I think, there's lots of different things we can point to that have led us to where we are today, but it's so serious now. Perhaps for those MPs or other elected members who wanted to put off standing up to what's going on, certainly, to their credit, the 21 Tory MPs who now find themselves out of the Conservative Party, having lost the Conservative whip, and again, just 2 more today that have come forward in support of a people's vote. I'm certainly doing a lot of cross-party work. I mentioned the Church House Declaration and letters. All of that work is going forward, and the various groups that have been referred to in the press, that it's fair to say we've got so many more meetings and conference calls that are going on now on a daily basis, whereas perhaps before it was not as targeted or not as focused. And in terms of what has to happen now, in my view, we have to see an extension to Article 50. Again, the debate around the sequencing of a general election and a people's vote. Why did we not support a general election? As Heidi said, because we're not going to support a general election on the Prime Minister's terms when we know full well that he determines the date, and he can change the date should he wish to after the 31st of October. So by extension, we crash out on a no-deal Brexit. Our responsibility to the country and in the national interest is to ensure that that cannot happen. Now, I would relish the opportunity for a general election, and bring it on, and particularly as you've announced, I've recently joined the Liberal Democrats, and there's a very clear policy now which is due to be discussed and voted on at the Lib Dem conference this weekend, and what the party would do in the event of winning a majority government. It's to revoke Article 50. But by its very nature, a general election is general. In 2017, the general election didn't solve the issue of Brexit. And again, that's why I'm firmly behind a people's vote. It's why we need to campaign for a people's vote. I agree with Heidi that we're seeing more people come on board every day because it's clear that Parliament cannot contend with the impasse that we see. Parliamentarians can't contend with it. We've got such a reckless Prime Minister that's prepared to circumvent our laws, essentially. So on that basis, we need to have that people's vote first and foremost to fix Brexit. And in terms of what we can all do together, everyone can put pressure on their MPs. I appreciate that in this particular constituency that might be more of a challenge. But there are certainly other MPs that are wavering. And in terms of, I would estimate that our collective reach on social media in this room is more than 5 million people. Between all of us here, that's a lot of people. Even if it's 1 million, no. Even it's
Put it on the side of a bus.
I don't know. It's certainly 1 million. Again, we've all got a platform. And particularly in this era of fake news, and we've seen some of the horrific stuff that the Brexit Party is spewing out, and it's really disgusting stuff. And what we saw again 3 years ago in the Vote Leave campaign, we can all use our social media platforms for good. We've all got family and friends and people that want to hear what we say and what we're passionate about. And for anyone that doesn't live in this constituency, showing up makes a difference. Yeah. Going to see your MP, I think, Heidi, we've discussed this before, but we get emails. Personal emails really matter, letters matter, postcards matter, but actually showing up in a surgery, if everyone did that in this room, again, not outside of this constituency, you can all make a difference. Because when you're faced with someone, and perhaps as a group, as Barnet for Europe as a group, to go to all your different MPs, it makes a difference and it has an impact. And it's difficult, to escape when it's someone, right in front of you. So I'd strongly urge people to do that and to continue doing it, and particularly at this juncture, and at the very least to be putting forward the plan for a people's vote. But just to say also, we're very much focused on a no-deal Brexit, because that would be absolutely catastrophic for our country. But we mustn't lose sight of actually stopping Brexit altogether. Yeah. And the challenge, there's no better Brexit. There's no jobs first Brexit. There's no, anyone that's trying to peddle that. Unfortunately, I strongly would challenge them. And by the government's own assessments and many organisations' assessments, there is nothing that's going to deliver for the next generation in this country. So we have to contend with no deal Brexit first, but not lose sight of the eye on the prize of stopping Brexit altogether.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sian, would you like to?
Sure. We were asked to answer those 3 questions, and like the others, like decades seem to happen every single week at the moment. And it's Wednesday. It feels like next Thursday at the moment because of the amount of things that we're all doing, the amount of news that there is, the amount of new information there is. The amount of different discussions that we're having, and it's an exciting time to be in politics, but it's a very worrying time to be in politics too. So I'm not going to offer a huge, great analysis of everything that's going on or everything I've done in the last week because I would be here all day. But I just wanted to talk about a few things that affect me in my job in terms of Brexit, and then I've got several jobs, so I'll go back onto the elections part in a minute. So one thing I am is a local councillor in Camden. And one thing we've had to do, and so is Luisa, in fact, and one thing we've had to do in Camden in the past couple of years, because of some serious local emergencies that we had, is redo our emergency planning service within Camden, and we've got a whole new team. And we were introduced to the team recently, and they showed us how they do emergency planning. And we said to them, what are you doing at the moment? And they just said Brexit. And this document, this Yellowhammer document that's come out eventually last night, makes it really clear the extent to which all of our public services are now absolutely obsessed, because they have to be, with reducing the impact of this potential no-deal Brexit. And the document itself is really scary, even though it's only a summary, even though it isn't the worst case scenario, even though we know from what Rosamund Derwin said that it is in fact the base scenario. Now, Rosamund Irwin once interviewed me for the Evening Standard, and she came around my flat. She did describe it as tidy. But in this instance, I think we can believe Rosamund Irwin and not Michael Gove. But she saw the document as the base case, and I think she is right, because some of the stuff that's in here is not half as serious as what I know is being discussed in local councils already. And there's stuff here about, the food supply, not just food costs that are going to affect the most vulnerable, but things like the knock-on effects of people being worried about food supply and going to the shops and panic buying, and therefore being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those things are in here. We've got all kinds of, because I work on the police, one of my other jobs is working on the Police and Crime Committee in the London Assembly, and we've heard there from the police how their problems with solving crime that crosses borders are going to get absolutely enormous when they suddenly lose access to all the information sharing agreements that we have across Europe. And this document talks about how smuggling, how the sudden tariffs that exist are going to really, really encourage people to do criminal smuggling and the illicit markets and things. And the police are not going to be able to deal with those things at the same time. The redacted section is about the petrol supply, and that redacted section is out there and is quite terrifying in terms of how we may well run out of fuel and how the fuel price is going to rise. And as a Green, I am obliged to warn you the extent to which our economy, the whole of the rest of the economy, depends really heavily on oil still. It shouldn't, but it does. And so that is going to have knock-on effects all the way down everything. I also work on housing. There's nothing in here about housing, but the economic shocks that are going to happen to the economy in the case of a no-deal Brexit, I'm convinced are going to have an effect on people fleeing the housing market, and a lot of people are landlords in London. We've got nearly 2.5 million people live in homes with private landlords. If even a fraction of those landlords decide to sell up, then council services that look after people who've become homeless, and most people who become homeless are people who've come out of private rented homes and been evicted through no fault of their own. If even a few hundred or 1,000 families start approaching councils for help, those council services are going to start to be overwhelmed. It is the scenario that's brought all of us together to say this must stop. And I cannot speak more highly for the MPs in Parliament in the past week and a half, because we've seen something that I've just wanted for such a long time, which is people in different parties in Parliament genuinely working together for the common good, putting their egos aside. And what normally happens in politics, I'm in the London Assembly too, everybody wants the ideas to be theirs, and the motions to be theirs, and the amendments to be theirs, and the bills to be theirs. And it's like people, the process of putting forward all these different ideas, and we saw that with the 8 or 9 different amendments earlier in the year. When people had time, they were not working together effectively, where there were lots of rival camps. Suddenly, when we had just a few days to sort out a bill, the parties from right across the spectrum in the opposition came together, worked with the independents as well, and actually sat down and wrote one thing that would do the job and sorted it out, and they all agreed. And they were in constant contact, and that's something I've never seen before, and it worked. And this is exciting. This is how politics could and should be. It's the mature kind of politics that you see in other countries that do have proportional representation. Now, one of my jobs is co-leader of the Green Party, and I've met recently with the Greens in Iceland, who are in government there in a coalition of 3 parties. And I also met this week the Foreign Minister of Finland, who is a Green, and he's in a coalition there of 5 parties. And when I met the Icelandic Greens, it was very embarrassing because they cannot understand why our politics is so broken, why people are not working together more against things like the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party teaming up, against things like no deal. But this week, when I met the Finnish Foreign Minister, it was a lot better because he's there with his 5 parties governing a country, and I was able to point to Parliament and say, look, this is something really, really good. And so I think that really does offer us absolute hope. And I think it's something that one of the questions is, what can we do locally? I think keeping up that dialogue, keeping up that, that constant communication between parties, even if you're not trying to agree on things completely, at least keeping up the contact and talking to each other. And when a really big decision has to be made, actually, then it becomes a lot easier. And I think that's just really good, mature politics that I'd really like to see. So I wanted to also mention the European elections, because those elections were held under proportional representation, and I think people there felt like they could vote for what they believed in, and we saw really huge votes for the Liberal Democrats, big votes for the Greens, and a proportional amount of MEPs elected from the different parties. And on election night, I had to do the wash-up on the radio and the TV and go and discuss these results that were coming in. And all of us in the opposition were sitting there in the studios, adding up all our votes together to see if between us we had a majority. And we did. And there's clearly a majority out there in the country for remaining, which is one of the reasons why we need to get a people's vote. And I do prefer doing a people's vote than a general election. I'll get onto a general election in a minute, because that would be a really decisive way of dealing with it. And general elections can get really messed up and mixed up, although there are things we can do about that. So I think we'll get a people's vote, and I think we can win it. I think there's a majority for remaining in the EU. And I think local people at the moment could really do with focusing on that quite a lot. Because I think you have got people here from lots of different parties. You want to remain. This is something you do agree on right now. And rather than wait for the parties in your local area to come to some sort of agreement, I think you could all be working together now to campaign for a people's vote. Now, I know you're doing that, and I've been speaking to lots of For Europe meetings around the country. And I know you're all holding excellent meetings like this and discussing things. And I know you're out there on the streets, getting people down to the big marches that we've been having. And I know you're out there on the streets with those amazing barometer things, asking people, what do you think, and should we leave or remain? And those things are absolutely great for showing people, in a campaigning sense, that they are with the majority in their local area. And those things are great. But I know, and campaigning on the ground to win elections is all about this, that actual real conversations with people is what does it. And if you're out on a street stall, then the people who come up to you to have those conversations quite often are people who don't agree with you and want to have an argument. Whereas, if you go out and knock on people's doors and talk to them one-to-one, if they want to, lots of people answer the door and go, no, I'm too busy, but you will have, in an hour, more useful conversations on doorsteps than you will standing in a town centre. And that's the message and the tip and the campaigning tip I've been taking to all the For Europe meetings is, don't just talk to the people that you already agree with. Go out and knock on people's doors. And most people, almost everybody, is absolutely lovely and will want to have a chat with you if you approach it in the right way. Just say, how do you feel about Europe? And they will all say, we're really fed up about this. And then you all know the conversations you can have after that when they say, I just want it to be over. Well, no deal won't make it over, and all of those things. You can have those really good conversations. And I've been doing that for the local elections, knocking on lots of doors in places which voted really heavily to leave, and finding Leave voters behind those doors and just saying, how do you feel about politics? And will you vote for my local council candidate, please? But also, they're nice people, they're at home, they're wanting to have that chat. So that's my absolute tip for what to do. Prepare now for that People's Vote campaign and get out and have those conversations. Now, Heidi talked about her Unite to Remain initiative and how we might fight the next general election. And it's quite true that our voting system at the moment does not tell us and does not create a parliament that represents the views of the people. So at the end of a general election campaign, we could end up none the wiser about this unless we do something really sensible and clever to try and work out what to do. And I think Heidi's, a lot of people shout out tactical voting, and that's not good. I think we need to be looking at tactical campaigning, at the very least parties talking to each other about where we are targeting in order to reduce that majority that could exist if the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party team up. At the very least saying, look, we're going to work hardest here, we're going to work hardest here, and being in communication about that. And then at the very most, there is Heidi's idea, which is genuinely putting forwards one candidate around which groups like yours can unite. And I think it is something we do all need to be talking to each other about. And I really hope there are some Labour people in the room today who are listening to me and will come and talk to us about that as well. But yeah, I think, long term, obviously, all of this chaos has shown that our constitution is no good. All of the difficulties we've had discussing whether or not to have a general election, how to fight a general election, show so clearly that we need proportional representation in future elections, but also the problems that led to Brexit, the people feeling that their democratic voice wasn't being heard, people living in safe seats where they just got ignored and ignored and ignored, but also people living in regions that were just neglected by successive governments with lack of investment and no effort being made to do things like transition people away from industries that we can't afford to have in the future, like coal and oil and gas, and transition those people to a new economy that's a green economy. All of those things need to be fixed as well. And we need to be having those conversations about devolution of investment and democracy around the country, about a new constitution in things like citizens' conventions. And I think people, far from being tired of politics, if you're asked to decide how should this country be run in the future, people would be up for fixing that. So yes, there's such a lot we need to fix. Literally almost everything, including the climate. But I think we've taken some steps in the last few months towards a new kind of politics in this country that, along with all the division and what the media try and make us do, which is, shout at each other and all say, only we can do this and all of those things, that the party conference season, quite honestly, is going to have us doing a little bit more of. But I think, in extremis, we showed in the last week or two that the parties can come together and can solve the biggest problems. And I think we should take that lesson forwards in all of the new things that we're going to be asked to do and all of the new crises that are going to happen over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much to Chipping Barnet for Europe for organising this event, and to all of you for coming tonight. It's so rare that I get to speak in a situation where I'm nodding my head furiously in agreement with those people who've preceded me, because normally I'm sitting in the European Parliament alongside the likes of Nigel Farage and his merry band of disaster capitalists. So this is very welcome. It's a nice change. I just want to pick up on something that Luciana said, actually, about the world seeing us with pity and contempt. Well, I think the one place where that's not true, actually, is in Brussels, because our European friends haven't given up on us yet. And that much was evident from when I was in Brussels last week and all the chaos was unfolding in the UK Parliament back home. I had colleagues coming up and hugging and high-fiving me in solidarity, especially when MPs managed to secure that legislation to stop no deal from being foisted upon us. So I think that underlines more than anything why we need to stay aligned with our closest friends and partners, because we do share the same fundamental values, and that is belief in liberal democracy. It is true to say that they were shocked and stunned by what was unfolding last week as well, but they can distinguish between the actions of our government and actually what's happening in the country at large, of which I think there are many more positive developments, as well as obviously some quite scary ones. So we were asked to first of all outline why we are where we are now. And the very simple answer to that question is, of course, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson got us into this mess by writing false Eurosceptic narratives as the Brussels correspondent for The Telegraph over 20 years ago, and making that the norm for reporting about what goes on in the place where I now work. He then made it worse by choosing to support the Leave campaign during the 2016 EU referendum, just for his own personal political gain. And now we have the misfortune of having this utterly unprincipled, self-interested man as Prime Minister. someone who's willing to cost the country vital food and medicine supplies, risk civil unrest, and wreck our economy. But fortunately, Boris Johnson and his Vote Leave facilitator Dominic Cummings have made a misstep. Because by choosing to shut down the UK Parliament, Boris Johnson's egotistical, authoritarian power grab has brought us all closer together. And you've heard already, we've been agreeing on a lot tonight, and I think there'll be much more of that to come. In the past, though, the Remain campaign, and we are still in a campaign after all, it suffered by us disagreeing too much on party politics and what the exact tactics should be. But now we are all working together much more effectively and finding areas of common ground. MPs have taken an important step to bring us back from the brink of no deal and hopefully buy us more time to resolve this mess that is Brexit. So thank you to Heidi and Luciana for doing that last week. And I can assure you that the cross-party efforts in Westminster are also being mirrored in Brussels. So just last week, Liberal Democrat, Labour, Green and SNP MEPs, we all got together to sign something called the Brussels Declaration. And this commits us to work together in the interests of defending our democracy and protecting our country from a disastrous no-deal Brexit. A number of us also met with representatives of parties from the island of Ireland ahead of an event and press conference that they're going to be having at the European Parliament on the 25th of September. And this is aimed at keeping a spotlight on just how dangerous a hard border would be for security there. And on Saturday, I spoke at the cross-party rally to defend our democracy in Westminster. I know Sian did as well. Because if there's one thing that we can all agree on, it's that our democracy must not be silenced. So if we're going to defeat these ideologues who are willing to force through a Brexit at any cost, then we need to cooperate. That's not to say that we won't have distinctions and differences of approach and some of our own red lines inevitably as political parties, especially when it comes to a general election, I suspect. But as Heidi will be able to testify, there are conversations happening and agreements being made in seats all over the country so that where we can, we put party politics aside in the interest of Remain winning. And we've seen what can be achieved when we do this. I'm very grateful to Heidi for coming to campaign for the Liberal Democrats, our new MP in Brecon and Radnorshire, Jane Dodds, and to Sian for agreeing that her party would step aside in the interests of a Remain candidate winning.
That was a local decision.
Okay.
We're a democratic party, local parties decide.
Very much.
But they did the right thing.
Yes, well, very much like the Lib Dems, then we also operate in that kind of way. But it's great that at the local level those conversations are happening because actually when you're in a local party, it's very easy to think in an adversarial way all the time and not look at the bigger picture. So it shows how far we've come, actually, that did happen. And it worked. And we can replicate this success all over the country if we put our minds to it. So all that matters now, should a general election happen, and I'm still fully behind a people's vote, of course, is that we wipe away the Tories' majority. Oh wait, they don't have one anymore, do they? But as for what you can all do in the meantime, it's keep protesting and campaigning. You know, join a political party if you haven't already. Obviously, I'd love you to join my party, the Liberal Democrats, but there are other Remain parties. And if you don't feel like doing that, then get involved with one of these amazing pro-European apolitical movements that have sprung up all over the country and are doing incredible work campaigning to get that message out there as well. And never give up. Because I have to admit, there have been moments when I've thought that it was game over and we were headed towards no deal. And as a member of the European Parliament, I'm very much at the heart of this existential crisis. And you know, sometimes you can feel a bit powerless watching the events unfold back home. But then I have to remind myself that I'm sitting here right now, elected on a very clear mandate, no doubt by some people in this room, to stop Brexit. So never, ever underestimate the strength of the pro-European movement that is happening in our country. And so I promise that I'll keep fighting. I'm sure the other fantastic ladies on this panel will. And together, I do believe we can make that happen, whether it's a people's vote or stopping Brexit via a general election. We can do it. We've made a lot of progress, but we've got to keep going.
Thank you so much, all of you, for giving us a perspective and also bringing us some hope, because that really matters. As we've said, what we're going to do now, we've got about 50 minutes. We've got a couple of roving mics, so if you have a question for one of the panel or all of the panel, please raise your hands, and we shall start taking them. Brilliant. Sorry, please, your question.
First, thank you, all of you, for saying what you said and being there for us all. It seems to me that two separate campaigns, and it would be good to separate them. One is all that you've said in terms of Remain and People's Vote, and that is one campaign, and that is excellent. The campaign that would be good to separate is a campaign, or at least an acknowledgement, around what liberal democracy means. I don't mean that in an intellectual sense. I mean that at the moment there is a people versus parliament. There is that campaign, that way of thinking going. And what there needs to be is some form of campaign that says, I think almost in your own words, don't give up on this country, don't give up on our democracy. And just literally pin, when no one thought politicians really cared, yes, they did, yes, they came together, yes, they were brave, and just show all of the parties, Conservative, just the whole lot, so that some people begin to see that liberal democracy has a meaning, and that it isn't just you can't trust them, it has no meaning. Because if we don't understand what liberal democracy means in a real sense, at an emotional value, among Leave voters, actually we've lost a much bigger game than whether or not we stay in the EU.
Thank you very much. All right, nice idea. Can we take one other? So that one other question, Dirk, the lady right next to you, just in front of you there. Yeah, go on. Let's do that, and then we'll try and answer those together and do the next batch.
Thank you, all of you. It was hopeful, at least. I'm desperate for another referendum. I'm desperate for a decision to stay in Europe. But I was down in Parliament at the weekend on Saturday with my daughter and her baby, passing pub loads of very, very angry men. It was like looking at the National Front all over again. And I wanted to be brave enough to go and sit and talk to them and say, really, Jacob Rees-Mogg isn't your friend. What do you seriously think Boris Johnson's going to help you? But my concern is, even in the best possible outcome for all I imagine most of us in this room think would a Remain thing, we've still got this massive division of parts of the country which have been hugely overlooked, I have to say, mostly by the Tory party, and austerity, and it's brought bitterness and anger. And I think I'm worried that even a Remain vote in another referendum will still leave those people really as bitter and angry as they clearly were on Saturday.
Sorry, can I just ask your names? Sorry?
Judith Knight.
Judith, and sorry, the lady behind you, the other question?
Alison Walsh.
Alison. So I think there's two sides to the same coin here. We've got one about a completely broken nation, and we've got one about a liberal democracy from Alison. What are we going to do about that? So who would, I'm guessing you could all have a go at that one, or those two. Heidi, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and this is the stuff that really keeps me awake. I represent South Cambridgeshire, one of the bubbliest bubbles of Remain territory in the country, but I grew up in between Barnsley and Wakefield, where my dad still lives. So there is a whole other world out there that we mustn't forget about. And this people versus parliament thing, what we need to make sure, because they are the two sides of the same coin. Boris Johnson isn't going to own that. We're going to own that.
Yeah.
This is people. It is the establishment, the parliament working for the people, not him owning it and him taking responsibility for it and jumping on that Nigel Farage bandwagon from the referendum. It would be brave to go into a pub full of, not least if alcohol's involved, that's often, sometimes it can help, but it depends. But all joking aside, I do think each of us, in our own quiet way, do have a responsibility, quietly when you can, to talk to people with a different point of view to you. But it's knowing when it's going to be adversarial and when you can do that in a safe way. Because we do need to find a way of bringing the country back again. And I think if we're fortunate enough, and I believe it is possible that we can get to that second referendum, boy, we've got some work to do on messaging, haven't we?
Yeah.
And I think what we need to try and do is find a way of people who voted Leave or Remain for that matter, but Leave principally last time. You know what? The buggers lied to me. I'm the smart one. I've got more facts now, and I know what's right for this country. Far more than the, oh, you're ignoring me, I'm stupid, I got it wrong. And we need to empower people, like we do our young people in schools, empower them with facts and knowledge and have them own the right to demand something better. But it will need everybody helping with the messaging. And I do wonder, actually, when we get to that campaign, whether MPs should stay well away from it. Perhaps nurses and doctors might be more trusted than us. But we do need to think really hard about the messaging.
Anybody else want to pick up on that? Sian, please.
Yeah, just, two things on that. First of all, the people in the pubs on Saturday were not your average Leave voters at all. They were the organised far right who came down specially from loads of different places to be that quite small group of quite loud, quite drunk, quite horrible people who scared some of the speakers away from that event. And I think that was not the average Leave voter at all. And actually, you should definitely all be following, if you're not already, the Remainer Now Twitter feed and the campaign Remainer Now, because these are all people who voted to leave, who honestly thought it was the right thing, who had various different reasons for doing it, but sincerely held, who have sincerely changed their minds, either because they feel betrayed and lied to, or because they just don't want it anymore. And you don't have to just change your mind about things. You don't have to have been wrong in the first place to just change your mind. And those are the kind of people, when I say knock on doors, that's what I mean. The chances of finding someone like those men, and they were all men, on Saturday, sorry, not all men, but they were all men. The chances of finding one of those behind a door is minuscule, but you will find some people who still think, honestly held belief that we can just get on with Brexit and leaving with no deal, we'll finish it off. And those are the people who you can have a perfectly great conversation with. There's also a video knocking around the internet of two ladies from Cheltenham, and that's where I'm from originally, that were found by the BBC having a chat about Brexit. And one of them was, I've changed my mind, it's a terrible idea, I don't know why I thought it in the first place. And then her sister comes along, and she's like, they're both older ladies, and says, no, I still think we should leave. And they went, oh, well, yeah, it doesn't matter though, does it? And they went home to have their tea, and they were just the loveliest two ladies. I love them. And that's much more the kind of conversation that we need to win. These are the majority of British people are great. And that's what I meant about having a citizens' convention to work out the Constitution, because I think that will genuinely help to fix democracy in ways that are really hopeful. Because if you ask people, like, what are the British values and what kind of democracy do we want, they will say things like the rule of law and respecting institutions and listening to people and caring for the most vulnerable, and all those things will come out of that kind of process. If we just get like normal, average people to actually say what their values are, then the right ones come out. And we cannot be thinking that those people in Parliament Square last Saturday represent anything other than the tiniest minority, and the rest of us can fix all of this.
Brilliant. Right, time is running on, so we'll take it 2 or 3 more. David, let's go your side, and I want somebody from Mr. David's politics class, so I'm guessing that gentleman there. If you just give us your name and your question.
Luke Jones.
Luke, right. Ben, can we get Luke? There we go.
Yeah?
Marvellous. Luke?
That's a weird feeling. Okay. I graduated from here 2 years ago. I'm an officer in the army. My statement is, a lot was being brought up about tradition and culture and heritage on the Leave side. And I think if we pretend like Brexit, this whole thing never happened, if it didn't happen, then we'd be like very mistaken, because there is a lot of change that should happen. That's my statement. And another statement is I think we should get more people in the army in politics, and more people, younger people in politics.
Sorry,
in the army. More younger people in the army in politics.
Okay.
I just wanted to know your views on the things that we should definitely, like the big concerns that we should change, especially controlling our own military and the border. Who leaves and who goes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luke. Right, let's take a couple more from over that side there, David. Any more? The gentleman next to you, David. Sorry, if you just say your name and the question.
Chris.
Right.
Hi. Well done to Heidi for setting up the organisation Unite for Remain, and Luciana for joining the Liberal Democrats. Not being particularly political about it at all, but I want to know how, looking at this constituency, how are we going to get rid of Theresa Villiers? Could you give us an example?
We want to know that as well.
Could you explain how it's going to work here, so we can, because bearing in mind the results of the last election, because I believe the Lib Dems were, came quite far, or had a very low vote in this constituency. So how's that going to work?
Thank you, Chris. Well, let's take one more. So we've got one about heritage. David, do you want to come down to the lady just here? Sorry, we'll go on that side. We'll be over there in a minute. There we go. Sorry, just your name and your question.
I'm Joe Pye. Do you mind if I stand up? I can't do it sitting down.
Please do.
Something that we haven't mentioned is a deal Brexit. Now, we probably haven't got enough time in the evening to go into what happens if we have a deal Brexit. Right. How are we going to deal with that? The other thing is that I hope that I can bring a little bit of a ray of hope. London for Europe, part of the European movement, doesn't have its own grassroots branches. But we are trying to do something about that. We've run a volunteer survey, got 167 absolutely fabulous people, from EU diplomats who are prepared to stuff envelopes to somebody saying, I don't care what I do, I probably haven't got any skills, but I want to help, I want to do it now. The thing that I want to say is, if you do, the main focus of our priority at the moment is to fill the gaps, because there are lots of constituencies within London that don't actually have any grassroots branches like you. You are absolutely fabulous, and I'm taking away your leaflets because you are an absolute beacon, and getting the message across. London for Europe is going to try and do that, to get it across. And we cross-fertilise. Wherever there's good stuff, we will try and bring it together. The thing is, if you want to volunteer, please go onto the London for Europe website and look at Join In. But the thing is, we are going to get together. We are now getting together, and the lead is from you people, but the grassroots, at our grassroots level, we can do so much, and let's do it. And let's go that extra mile. It's exhausting, but let's do it, because we really are worth it, and our young people are worth it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. That's perfect. We've got three questions there. Luisa, you'll excuse me, there's a question about how do we get young people into politics.
Sure.
If I may ask you that one. And then Joe's question about a deal Brexit and what we do. Maybe, Luciana, you can help us with that one. And the thing we all want to know here is but for people in constituencies where there's a hard, I was going to say headbanger, we're not supposed to use that word, are we? A hard lever. What can people like us on the ground do realistically? So Sian or Heidi, if you can help us with those questions. Louise, would you like to give us your thoughts?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think that more young people should get involved in our politics, and our politics needs to be much more representative in general of all groups. And actually, it's their futures that are at stake in this whole situation, so which links nicely to the question of a deal Brexit, because any form of Brexit will be damaging for young people and their futures. There are going to be fewer opportunities available to them. And for me, this is really personal. It's actually the reason why I joined the Liberal Democrats. I joined in the week after the referendum result because, first of all, I was just paralysed by what had happened, basically, and moped for a while. But then I thought, okay, I've got to try and do something about this, because my first thought when that result came out was other young people aren't going to have the same opportunities that I did. And I was very fortunate to go and study in a French university and benefit from free movement directly. And it was an incredible experience and has broadened my horizons in so many ways and is a big part of the reason why I'm doing the job that I'm doing now. So I don't want to see a limit to what other young people can do, whether that's just travelling or educational opportunities as well. And I think that's why it's so important that we fight any form of Brexit. And I'd just like to say one thing on this concept of a deal Brexit. I do think that's a bit of a danger, because obviously Boris Johnson's tactic was to try and run down the clock and scare MPs into voting for a version of Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, probably with just a cosmetic change. And there is a bit of an indication that the EU could capitulate to this in a way, not on anything concrete, but today there was a document, a resolution published by the Brexit Steering Group, which is led by Guy Verhofstadt in the European Parliament. And we questioned him, because he sits in the same political grouping as the Liberal Democrats, yesterday about this, and it floats the idea of an Ireland-only backstop. But actually, this is hugely problematic, because it could be used by the government to pretend that they've negotiated a new deal, and there's a big PR exercise at the moment coming out from government. I mean, I can't open anything on social media without seeing their comms about getting ready for Brexit on the 31st of October, and I very much hope that because of the work that happened in Parliament last week, this can't happen in practice now. But, you know, the messaging is still out there. They're kind of closing their ears off to the reality. And I'm not prepared to accept that they've wasted more than 3 years of our time and that they're going to go back to this proposal, because actually that was an idea that the EU put on the table at the beginning. And was rejected by Theresa May's government. So the blame absolutely lies at the door of the Conservative Party for dismissing this option out of hand and causing the uncertainty of Brexit to be prolonged even more. Obviously, I've always wanted to remain and will wholeheartedly continue to argue for that. But we shouldn't accept that just because we get to this point where it's the last minute and you're faced with the prospect of no deal, that some version of the withdrawal agreement somehow becomes acceptable when Parliament has roundly rejected it, 3 times? So that's why, actually, everything that's been said about campaigning has to continue, and those conversations have to take place on the doorstep and on street stalls, because that rhetoric is getting through to some people, unfortunately, and we have to reinforce that not only is no deal clearly disastrous for all the reasons that the Yellowhammer document outlined, but a deal will be damaging as well, very damaging in lots of areas.
Thank you. Maybe Heidi and Luciana could ask either of you. So Chris's question about how we get rid of Theresa Villiers, or if we broaden that to how people in very hard leave constituencies, what they need to do. Our situation is very clearly, in the last election, we got to within 353 votes of unseating her. The person that came second was the Labour candidate. For those of us who are of a pro-Remain persuasion, as I think Chris is saying, we find that Labour is still not a pro-Remain party, so we're stuck with this kind of dichotomy. What can we do?
I'll give a party people answer.
And if you can answer that and then tell us the lottery numbers, that would also help us.
I just.
As the Labour candidate in this seat, that's not my position.
Sorry, Emma, I promised to come to you, but From our perspective, Labour at the moment has not come out unequivocally as a pro-Remain party. We understand completely that you are a Remainer yourself. But those of us in this constituency are faced with that kind of that dilemma. So can I pass the question to you? Sorry, I'm really sorry. We can't start shouting. Can we allow? I'm really sorry. Can we allow Luciana to answer the question, and then we will come back to Emma for her position. Sorry.
I'll start my answer by saying that I've met Emma many times. I like her very much on a personal level, and this is not a personal challenge. We just have to contend with the political reality in which we find ourselves. So that, we will no doubt have a very nice chat afterwards, and I hope that despite our when we find ourselves in different parties, that we will still get on. But I think we find ourselves in the midst of a national emergency, and I've said it on TV. I don't use those words lightly, and everyone has to pick a side. And I chose to leave Labour for many reasons, but one in particular was on Brexit. Because as someone who represented a Remain constituency who campaigned with every sinew within me to Remain, and who feels very, very strongly that the best deal that we have is the one we have already and that we should not be leaving the EU, I couldn't continue to do that within the Labour Party. Other people will take different views, but that was the decision that I took. And I just think that the moment we find ourselves in, if we look and reflect on the local elections and the European elections, here in London, the Liberal Democrats won. The Liberal Democrats picked up 700 seats in the local elections. We are not fighting these elections now anymore, in my view, on a left-right axis. I wrote a column about this in the Evening Standard 2 days ago, which people can read. This is all about, do we want an open country or do we want a closed country? And I believe at this next election, there is everything to play for. I think our two-party system is broken. I think actually it's dead as we see both parties gravitate towards the extremes of their fringes. At the head of the Labour Party, whether we like it or not, Jeremy Corbyn is a Brexiteer. And if you see his comments on television yesterday, he just wants that general election. And in my view, that is not in the national interest, and that is not going to stop Brexit. So in terms of what happens next, here in this seat, there's everything to play for. And I think we've seen it. We've seen it in what can happen. I think there's every chance the Liberal Democrats could win here in terms of the position that they put forward. People will disagree. But again, I'm just saying, I think things have changed. Things are evolving. Things are different. You can disagree with me. But you only have to reflect on the fact that Liberal Democrats won here in London just a few months ago. They picked up all these seats. There is a movement. There is a shift in this country. The polls are closing every single week. So you asked the question, I'm telling you what I believe. I just think that Liberal Democrats could be the greatest party in the next election.
Thank you, Luciana. In the interest of balance, can we ask Emma if you'd like to state the position, and then I'd like to get on to some more questions from that side. So
to be clear, the Labour Party position is a second referendum. That is very clear. That is our party position, with Remain on the ballot. So to get the people's vote we all want, and to get Remain on the ballot, which we all want, I think we do need to work with all parties, and that does include Labour at the moment. It has to include Labour, given the maths across the country, and especially the maths in this seat and the two neighbouring seats across Barnet, where we absolutely do need to get rid of really nasty Brexit Tory MPs. But one of the most important things from 18 years of campaigning as a political member of a party is infrastructure. There are no Liberal Democrat councillors in Barnet anymore. There are no Liberal Democrat councillors in Chipping Barnet anymore. I live in Hornsey and Wood Green. I live just over the border. I'm pretty sure that there's probably going to be a fairly big Liberal Democrat presence in Hornsey and Wood Green because it's a seat they've previously held. We need to use the resources we have where they're going to make the biggest difference. And here in this seat, I have been very clear that I would vote Remain, that I would campaign for Remain. I'd say that alongside numerous frontbench members of my political party. But I, like the Liberal Democrats and the other people here in the Green Party, I'm part of a democratic political party, which means that next month at conference, later this month at conference, I will be standing, delivering leaflets, handing people out, haranguing delegates to back Remain, which has gone forward by numerous parties across the country, that Labour will come out for Remain. But also, you have to look at the seat you're in, you have to look at the candidates you've got. And here, we have 353 votes, Labour, behind the Tories. I need every single person who wants to Remain to think tactically about what that means to this seat.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much. Right. So let's take a couple more questions. Dirk, I'm trying to get you to keep fit here, mate. The gentleman at the top with the hat on has had his hand up. Sorry. Sorry, just give us your name then and your question. Terry, yep. Well, it's all right. Terry, just shout your question and I'll make sure everyone can hear it.
Can I get this straight? Emma is a staunch Remainer. You are called Unite to Remain. You've just told us you are going to stand against a staunch Remainer. How does that make any sense whatsoever?
Thank you, Terry. Right. Okay. Other question, Dirk, the gentleman in front of Terry. Dirk. Sorry. Your name, sir? Kieran. And your question?
I'd just like to say I dislike the term people's vote. I think that farce we went through in 2016 was the most dishonest I can ever remember, and I think I want an honest referendum.
Right.
But also, coming back to the election, which the panel focused on, the idea of an election is you gain a majority. Now, if you've already got a majority in Parliament, why run the risk of losing that at a general election?
Okay, so general election majority, right. The gentleman here in the front row, sorry, if you just shout your name. So did everybody hear that question? Is why run the risk of losing a majority at general election if you're at Hebron?
Who's majority?
It's working here.
Sorry, Kieran, whose majority were you referring to?
Well, the Remain.
So you're saying that the balance in Parliament has now shifted to Remain?
They've got their foot on Boris's throat, and I would like it to stay there.
Kieran, I'm with you, mate. I'm with you. Right. Dirk, is that working, the mic?
Yeah,
sorry, the gentleman in... Sorry. Yeah, this gentleman...
My name is Mark Shook, and I just want to say that I think the best description of the Labour Party's position on Brexit was in a cartoon in one of the national papers this morning, which showed someone trying to describe it with the use of a very complicated-looking quadrilateral equation.
Right.
My question is on the other big roadblock to what we all agree we want to do. What is the sense of the panel on any likely agreement between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party?
Right, okay. Good question. Thank you, Martin. I think we'll take one more, Dirk, if we can, because we're running out of time. We want to get as many people. So the gentleman over there with the glasses, yes, please, if we can. So just your name and your question, and hopefully we've got...
Sure, I'm Lewis. I am a policy wonk, lover of Brexit cast, lover of the Lib Dems, and I want my children to grow up green. So I drove out here to just make two comments. One which has already happened, which is Yellowhammer came out, and what I wanted to say is, what's the rush? Stuff will start to leak, and Yellowhammer's coming out, something else will leak tomorrow. But the comment that I wanted to make is the weapon that Cummings has that we don't. It's the same weapon that Steve Bannon had in the US to win the Clinton election. They want to leave EU, and that's social media, micro-targeted ads.
Right.
What we need is a war room. We need people who understand statistics, social sciences, big data.
Right.
And I'll tell you, you're going to find volunteers. We're just aching to come out.
Okay.
So if anybody, is one of your...
Sorry, we just want to get the panel to answer. So Lewis, thank you for your question.
Please tell me that you agree that we need to counter the social media campaign.
Absolutely, right. I'm going to ask Heidi a couple of those questions. So one was from Terry about how, when you've got a staunch Remainer, what should you be doing? And also the social media question that Lewis just raised. And we'll come back to those.
So the whole premise of Unite to Remain, and it's why I'm risking my own career by staying as an independent for as long as it takes, is that any deal on seats has to be analytically based, on fact, polling, most recent results. You lump in there some on-the-ground knowledge about local candidates, and then on top of that, a pile of compromise and humility that says we're not all going to get all the seats we want. Some of us will have to stand down in some. Gosh, don't like the sound of that. But you know what? The greater prize is this. And Sian was absolutely right to point out the big but. This is about local democracy, and local parties have to be content with this. Now, most of our targets in Unite to Remain, and it shows what a journey I've been on, are predominantly Tory marginals, where there is probably a Lib Dem who's the most likely candidate close by. But we would, with the campaign comes money. There are donors, British entrepreneurs, who want to put money into those seats. They're not Green supporters or Plaid Cymru supporters or Lib Dem supporters, they're Remain supporters. And they're prepared to put money into seats when the parties have banged their heads together and come up with a compromise and come up with one Remain candidate. Now, clearly, we're not going to achieve that in 650 seats around the country, and there's no need, because some very hard Leave voting seats, there's no point. If we've got, it's all about resources, we've got precious resources, where does that money, and the social media, which I'll come on to, where can we be most effective? And you know, there'll be some tough conversations, and I dare say for the Lib Dems as well, maybe in seats like this. And it's important that Unite to Remain, we're a brokering organisation. Parties, what do you need? Bit of polling? Right, we'll get some polling for you. Do you need some data crunching? Yeah, we'll do some data crunching for you. But the parties have to come up with the seats that they feel that their local parties and members would also support. This has to be, you know, it can't be top down, it has to be very much grassroots up. But, you know, the analytical part of Unite to Remain will always be, now what's the likelihood in that seat? What's the likelihood? How likely is it if we focus social media and campaigning and funds there, is it going to work? Or are we better looking at that seat over there? So it won't be me that makes the decision about what happens in this constituency here. But what I would say generically, every seat we have that conversation about, you know, what is most likely here, because, you know, these donors, they're not going to want to put money into seats where it's not going to make a blind bit of difference, or where in a lot of seats it's going to be business as normal and the parties will compete. On the social media point, the very fortunate thing is that being the Member of Parliament for South Cambridgeshire, which is quite close and has a big chunk of Cambridge, quite a few brains. So a big part of this, absolutely, it's the micro-targeting. And I have to be very careful how I say this. We will make sure that we have a, comma, or a space, legal approach that, like Dominic Cummings did. And the best social media brains on this. And it will be the spend of the local parties and the seats that will determine how to do that. But you're absolutely right. They played a very smart game last time. We need to play it too, but we need to do it legally. And we're absolutely focused on that.
I know that, do you mind if I come to Sian on this? Because I know you've got 4 or 5 jobs now, but in your past you developed and ran websites as well. So I think you probably have a very good handle on this. So your view in answer to Lewis's question on the social media piece.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got 2 things to say. I mean, one is to back up what Heidi said there, that the least helpful thing we can do is shout at each other in individual seats about who, you know, how dare you stand against our candidate, oh, we're the best. I think it's really important that parties do talk at a national level, if possible, about how we can do this collaboratively, more sensibly than this kind of thing going on at meetings, because it's awful for the candidates. It's awful for my candidates as well. And actually, there is something that can be done that is more, I don't want to say not grown up, because you're clearly a grown up there, but you know what I mean? There's something more constructive we can do where we're talking at
please, we're
a
not
wider level.
We're not going to have shouting out. I'm really sorry.
Individual seat, in any individual seat, there can only be one winner of these arguments, and that's where it gets a little bit nasty. Whereas if you're starting to talk a bit more widely, compromise is possible. And the thing about social media is they're not as good as they think they are at this, and rules have come in via Facebook since the last campaign. And now when there's a political advert, you can click on it and you can see who paid for it. And I really hope, this is going to damage the trust that there is in all these centrally promoted nonsense things. Even their, you know, click here to have your say, sign up to our petition or enter a competition stuff will have to be declared now as being from them. And I think our grassroots groups and our reach through grassroots groups on social media is our secret weapon against that in the new campaign, but also in the new world of just affecting the social environment now, changing people's opinions now. Because if you see a post that's like from the Leave campaign and whatever it's called at the time, nationally, you're not going to trust it. But if you see something that comes from Chipping Barnet for Europe, written by Joe, is it? Yeah? Yeah. Who's a person you might have seen on the high street, you will trust that far more. And I think we have a secret weapon, and it is our grassroots, and it is our grassroots on social media, because they've blown it. We know what they did, and people will not be fooled twice, I think.
Right, thank you, Sian. We're running short on time, so let's try and get some more questions in, because, wow. So, right, so David, can we get to Marisha at the back, please? Sorry, Kieran, I'll come back to your question, sorry. I mean, it's lovely to see that we got so much desire to talk, but unfortunately time is running on, and these people are very, very busy, so we'll see how quickly we can go. Marisha, what's your question?
We do have a Liberal Democrat grassroots infrastructure. It's just not particularly visible, and perhaps that's the best way for it. I have 3 issues I wanted to raise, which have been raised with me by others who are in this room today and haven't put their hands up. So yesterday afternoon, I had a very interesting conversation with someone in that area of the room about the Supreme Court and how we win the case on Tuesday. And I would like the members of the panel to tell us how we will win on Tuesday. I've heard about it from someone in this room. I want to hear what you're hearing. Also, non-disclosure agreements. On my way here, the reason why I was late was because a photographer stopped me to speak with me. He told me that Coty, Rimmel, Max Factor and Bourgeois are all going to remove their head office from London and move it to Amsterdam. And he told me that the management consultancy had said that 60 other brands were moving to Amsterdam. This is hot off the press, or it's not even reached the press yet. And that's why I'm late, so apologies, but please comment on that matter. And lastly, IT issues and the government use of data have been raised today with the Information Commissioner's Office. I'd very much like your comments on that as a former IT professional myself.
Right. Marisha,
thank you very much.
Well done. You've got 3 questions in one there, like how you roll. Let's take some up. David, where's David gone? Can we come down to this gentleman in the middle right there?
It's working now.
So, there we go. In the medium of song, please. No, go
on. I think we've got a problem as Remain campaigners, because basically what we're campaigning for is to do nothing. We want to stay in Europe, and that's not very sexy. And when you're campaigning to do something, however crazy it is, a lot of people can get quite excited about that. And I've spent 3 years saying how sensible it is to stay in the EU. It's not very sexy. So I'm just wondering if, I'm sure you're much better at this kind of thing than we are. How do you sell staying in Europe as an active choice, as an adventure?
Can I just ask your name, sorry?
Steve Taylor.
Steve. So Steve, you want to know how we make Remain sexy? We'll do that. David, gentleman down the front here. In fact, there's 2. Let's take these 2 here, and then we'll see how we go, if that's okay.
Hello there. My name is Andrew,
yep.
And I have one very simple question.
Good.
Let's say we manage to get a second referendum. One of the biggest issues is, or the biggest reasons against it is, we've already had a referendum. How many more referendums do you want? One of the biggest issues was the original referendum was an advisory referendum. There was no restrictions on how many people needed to vote in order for it to be recognised. There was no minimum number of people to vote one way or another. Will that actually be different the second time? Will we actually say you need a minimum of 60% of the country to vote, 60% to vote one way or another?
Thank you, Andrew. So mandatory or otherwise? Sorry, so your name and your question?
My name is James. My question is, I saw a quote the other day that bad communication is when you listen to reply rather than listen to understand. How much good communication is going on in politics right now?
Right. Okay. So, how much good communication is going on in politics right now, which I think, because I'm trying to manage the time here, we can bundle up with Steve's question about how do we make the campaign, what's the messaging there. Kieran's question and also Andrew's question was about an honest referendum and a mandatory referendum. So, Luciana, would you like to start with that one?
So I'm against the general election. I think the only way, as I said, we're going to solve this is by having that people's vote. And in answer to the question about language is really, really important. And let's be very clear, I don't want to be calling it a second referendum, because that sounds like it's a repeat of the first referendum. It will not be the same question. It's actually on the terms of the deal and saying to the country, this is what we've managed to secure from Europe. Is this what you want? I think that's very, very different. I mean, there's a lot of discussion and polling around what the best language is. Having it as a confirmatory referendum on the actual terms of the deal, I think that's where people are headed in terms of language. Is it Marisha?
Marisha at the back
yeah,
there,
so
yeah.
If I could just, your questions were all about, again, it just kind of adds to the weight of why this is bad. And your first question about Supreme Court, I wish we could answer that. Obviously, it's a judiciary, and indications, obviously, I've heard lots of different things, and we are petitioners in that case. We will just have to wait and see. We're hearing, positives, negatives. We just don't know. We'll just have to wait until Tuesday. But your point about these companies that are looking to move to Amsterdam, there were so many companies that were approached by the Dutch government and actually said, come here. We saw it first and foremost with the European Medicines Agency that's already moved over to Amsterdam, and that was has set in train lots of other businesses following suit, and it's not just Amsterdam, it's other countries as well. Frankfurt, I was in just the other week, Lisbon. We're seeing many British companies consider their options, and many companies, in fact one that I was with this morning, whose deals are basically suspended until they know what's happening, and know that if we do see either a no-deal Brexit or any sort of Brexit, then their future prosperity will be very, very seriously impacted. And ultimately that's about people's livelihoods. People's livelihoods locally across the country. This is why obviously this stuff really matters. Your point about data is obviously we've all touched on it, but it's beyond serious. And did they not already learn from the fact that they've received fines via the Electoral Commission for what they did last time? We obviously have to do everything possible to hold them to account, and that's why obviously we do have to work together. We do have to expose what's going on. The fact that we're having to give people the advice of disabling their cookies in order for the government not to exploit our data, it's a very, very serious state of affairs. But we have to talk about it and expose it. And my worry is I listed all the various things that have just happened in recent days. Some of this stuff gets lost because there's just so much stuff that they're prepared to do. I said it the other day. They'll stop at nothing, and they'll go to the lowest steps, and we just have to continue to expose that and hold them to account. Steve, your question is connected to that about how do we make Remain sexy, and how do we sell something to the public about them voting for something. I think it's really important that it's not just Remain; it's Remain in reforming the European Union. I think that's very much got lost in the argument. Yeah. And it's about stopping the chaos, because we've seen the chaos that's come just over the course of the past 3 years. And again, I shared some examples of what we've lost. We talk about austerity. Again, I've been castigated for saying this, but I think austerity is going to look like a walk in the park in terms of what's going to come down the line. Yeah. And we just, what's happened over the course of the past 3 years? Inequalities in our country have got wider. We've seen our life expectancy stall. We've seen our healthy life expectancy stall. The north-south divide is only getting more pronounced. These are the issues that matter, and if we want to stand up for them, we need to stop Brexit. And that's certainly the arguments that I'll be putting forward. But again, we also have to look at the polling about what will make the greatest difference. And Andrew, your point is really important about, if we do get a second referendum, it's often lost that it was an advisory referendum. It wasn't a binding referendum. I'd be very keen to sign up to say the next referendum should be binding, and also to look at what the proportions should be. I mean, the fact that no one was prepared to stand up and say 48-52, that's too close. Do you know what I mean? That is not grounds for which we should be leaving the European Union. But we have to, I think, show more moral courage and conviction and be very clear about what the ramifications are. And again, this comes back to all of us as elected representatives to stand up and be honest with the public about the consequences. And ultimately, in the national interest, if we think this is going to be bad for the country, then we have to call it out. And it's not Brexit at any cost. I don't believe that's what people voted for last time. And that's, in my view, the next time where we have to stand up and be counted on that point.
Brilliant. Okay. We're running very short of time, so we're going to take a white-knuckle ride and see if we can get a few more questions in, and I think we'll have to call it a day there. So if you're just trying to make a point, I'd ask you not to. If you've got a question for the panel while we've got them here, can we try and get those? So, Dirk, can we start with the gentleman at the front, right on the front row? again, your name and the question, and let's try and just get them out quickly. Sorry.
Hello, it's Stephen Barber, and I just wanted to pick up on something that Luisa was talking about earlier around getting younger people involved in politics more generally, and of course in this Brexit debate, because it's younger people who will live with the consequences of this.
Yeah.
Now, thanks to the actions of MPs last week, the likelihood is we'll have an extension to Article 50, which is going to go to, what, perhaps January, February, maybe even further?
End of January.
I mean, at that point, we're pushing 4 years since the last referendum. How many people, younger people, 16 and 17-year-olds, have come onto the electoral roll? It's the best part of 1 million, isn't it? How many, I mean, you know, I know no one likes to say this, but how many of Leave voters have died?
Steve, I'm really sorry. Can I push you for the question?
At what point do we say, actually, that referendum 4 years ago lacks
no
legitimacy?
longer valid. Right. Okay. At what point does the 2016 referendum become invalid? Can we go to the gentleman right up the top at the back, please?
My question is, how do we help people to understand that there's big financial interests behind no-deal Brexit?
Right.
It is disaster capitalism. Jacob Rees-Mogg's father wrote a book which was called Blood in the Streets, Investment Profits in a World Gone Mad.
We've got the question. So how do we help people understand that there's disaster capitalists involved? This gentleman there is a Barnet fan. He sits in front of me at Barnet Stadium, so he definitely has to ask a question.
Right, I just want to say I'm not going to make.
Sorry, can I ask your name?
My name's
I know
Philip.
who you support.
My name's
I don't know
Philip. Philip.
Yep.
And I just want to say I did like what Heidi had to say about analysis within Chipping Barnet about the realities of polls and what happened in 2017. In a non-political partisan way, I am disappointed partly with this evening because I came here with one expectation, that we as Remainers will want to win in Chipping Barnet. I don't want to hear about all the other things. We all agree with what's being said. Yes, we can talk about social media. We know the Leave campaign have kicked off. I've seen some of their adverts only yesterday. They've started again, and they're very vile in some of the comments they're coming out with. But my point is that I'm here this evening. I want Theresa Villiers out. I want a Remain person to win it. If that means Emma from the Labour Party, I know she's got to hold her nose because Corbyn has got this ambiguous, incoherent policy. But as far as I understand, Emma is 1,000% Remain, will defy a three-line whip and will become a rebel herself. If she's willing to stand here tonight and say to all of us she's prepared to do that, shouldn't we get behind a candidate that can win? Don't split the vote. Don't split the vote.
Fair question. Thank you for that. Right. Can we go, the gentleman there with his hand up with a beard, just there?
Hi, quick question for Heidi. I'd heard rumours that the Electoral Commission is being registered versions of party names with Unite to Remain at the end of them so that it could appear on the ballot paper. Is there any truth in that?
Right. Right, so I'm going to take one last question. So this gentleman here with the glasses, Dirk, by you. I'm really sorry. All right, sorry, David's shouting at me, so we'll take two more. Right, sorry. Quick, just very quickly, just the name and the question, please.
My name's Paul Edwards. I'm a Labour councillor in Barnet. My question's to the two MPs. You've started now from a period of despair to a period of hope by the actions you've taken against Boris Johnson. Can you go further, vote of no confidence in it, and take control of Parliament and sort out the referendum, or whatever we call it, to stay in Europe?
Right. So can they take a vote of no confidence? Right, David, let's do two there. So the lady next to you. Sorry.
Hi, this is slightly...
Sorry, your name and just a question. I'm really sorry, but we're running out of time.
Yeah. So my name's Julia, and I wanted to talk to Sian about how you protect local communities. So Barnet haven't published an update on their no-deal Brexit plan since February. The updated version is going to be published on the 29th of September to go to the Policy and Resources Committee. We're only allowed 2 questions from the whole borough on that item. So if you ask about housing, you can't ask about food banks, you can't ask about social care. What would be your number one question? And just, if anyone wants to turn up to the meeting, I think that'd be a good idea.
Julia, thank you for that. So we will ask Sian that question. Let's take one more. Can we go to the lady behind you, David, in the green? Sorry, just a name and a question?
My name's Tabitha. I know we're in Chipping Barnet, but we're from down the road in Finchley and Golders Green. Is there any wavering in Finchley and Golders Green? Is there any angle we can try with an MP who clearly doesn't believe what he's saying, and it's the most infuriating thing in the world?
Sorry, right, I think we're going to call a line there. Heidi, there was one question specifically for you.
Pick out the ones I want to answer.
Go for it. Go for it. Let's do it.
So the question from gentleman somewhere over here about the Unite to Remain descriptor. So it is something we're talking to the parties about to help voters identify. So they'll get to the ballot box. Oh, where's the Green and Plaid Cymru gone in this seat? Why is it just Lib Dem? Oh, brackets, Unite to Remain. So that's something we are talking to the parties about. We haven't registered with the Electoral Commission yet because it's actually the parties who would have to, because it will be descriptor that they would use. But yes, it is something we're talking about. Vote of no confidence, take back control. Well, vote of no confidence means you need to have a Prime Minister ready for government of national unity. We're still talking about that. It's not really Jeremy Corbyn, I'm really sorry, it's just not. But it is something in our multiple... As Luciana has said, this is mass communication on a cross-party basis by WhatsApp. We don't live without WhatsApp as MPs. We are constantly on it and talking about this all the time. And be under no illusion, we are wargaming every step that could possibly go. And there are conversations going on about if we need to vote no confidence and who would lead that. Won't be me, just by the way. Labour, let's just say about the Unite to Remain thing. The whole point of Unite to Remain is about compromise. And that compromise requires, okay, well, if we as a party are going to stand down in X, Y, Z seats so that you can, then I need to be prepared to stand down in A, B, C. The Labour Party are not going to stand down in any seats around the country. I mean, that's just a fact. So the way I see the Labour relationship working, and this is generically, forgive me, I don't know the dynamics of the local constituency here, this is just general policy, is that where we can, local party, with local party blessings of all the individual national parties, we will come up with that dream list. My ambition is 100 seats. I'd love it if it was more, but 100 seats where the polling tells us, strip out the candidates, like in Brecon, and you've got a chance of winning. We do that first, we look at what's left, and then you'll know there are tactical voting websites out there. So Gina Miller has one, Compass, Best for Britain, People's Vote are coming out with one. We're working with all those tactical voting websites, organisations, to make sure that they use the same data first and foremost and come out with the same recommendations. So we'll share our list, God willing that we get that list together and we all agree, and then they wrap a tactical voting plan around it. So the two dovetail perfectly, and that should mean in as many seats, through one guise or another, we should be giving advice to the public about how to vote. And that's what we'll do in these sorts of seats, I would imagine.
Thank you. Sian, can I ask you to answer Julia's question about at the local community level, what questions should we be taking? What's the number one question she asked that we should be taking to our pretty lax council about what they're doing?
I would say, because they're probably covering quite a lot of things already, go for the fuel thing, the redacted thing about fuel and how that will affect you, because everything needs fuel. We've not yet sorted out the green economy we need, and housing, because I've never seen anyone really tackle that question of private renters needing support having been evicted. And I think it's a risk, and it's a particular risk in London, which is why it's not been picked up nationally. I want to say two things about how we campaign. Certainly with the young people, absolutely 100%. We need the young people to be leading this campaign, as they're very good at leading campaigns, as the climate movement has seen. So we should get them doing that. But also we should be our MEP for London, Scott, has launched a campaign this week with some communication around saying how much we value our EU citizens in London. We've got 1 million of the 3 million of them here. Let's make the campaigning personal and about real people speaking up about their neighbour and their brother and their sister-in-law and their nephew who are EU citizens. And let's not have Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell leading the communications on this, because it didn't work last time and it won't work again. Let's get real people and real EU citizens and real young people who are going to lose all those opportunities you talked about leading this campaign, because then we can win.
Right then, Luciana, do you want to pick up on any of those?
So the issue is a really, really serious one about Barnet and its risk register. In stark contrast with Camden, they haven't updated it since February, and already on the February risk Well, but what it does say is, in particular, is this issue about shortage of workforce in social care. And already they've highlighted that as a very serious challenge, that they can't mitigate against the damage a no-deal Brexit would bring in that particular area. I say that as someone who has a 100-year-old grandmother who lives in the borough, who relies on social care and support. So it's very, very serious. And, again, when it comes to protecting our elderly, that's just one of the areas in addition to the housing and other things. So if you can share it out amongst you, I would push for that. And I just say that, the fact that you've got, we talk about lobbying or going to visit your MPs. You've got hard Brexiteer councillors that are not representing the majority of the people across the borough who support Remain. And again, you can go to their surgeries, and people in this room can go to their surgeries and hold them to account as well. The question about, obviously across all of Barnet, you've got 3 MPs, you've got 2 hard Brexiteers, and you've got another who's taken a government job. And, he has to be held to account, they all have to be held to account. Again, emails make a difference, but go show up, because I know plenty of people that have gone to show up at all of the MP surgeries, but you need to go show up every single week. There's nothing to stop you doing it, to go to those surgery meetings and to hold them to account. It's not okay when you represent a Remain constituency to take that government job and to put your head down and think that your constituents aren't going to take note of what you're doing.
Thank you. Louise, have you any final points to make from you?
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on the question about how we sell staying in Europe as an active choice. Well, the simple answer to that is that global challenges require global solutions. And actually, we can't tackle the climate emergency if we aren't working at the multilateral level with our European partners to do that, regardless of all the good initiatives that are coming from the Mayor's office or from individual local councils. Toxic air particulates don't know regional and local borders. So we have to work on that collectively if we want to have any success, and it is an emergency. There are other similar issues. If we want to clamp down on multinational tax evasion, we need to be staying in the EU in order to do that. The EU is the only body that has been powerful enough to do something about that already, and there's much more work to be done, as we all know. And actually, this is one of the big priorities on the agenda for the next mandate, and I think it would be incredibly sad if we threw away the opportunity to address some of the real grievances people have, rightly so, through the one forum where we can actually do something about it. Similarly, there are other important initiatives happening that benefit lives of people that go beyond our country as well. So the EU has the power to sanction countries that discriminate against minorities, and actually this goes to the heart of our fundamental values, I think. And we should be playing a part in that and making sure that our voice is heard, because that kind of situation can also happen to us, as we've seen with the rule of law being threatened here in the UK, and the fundamental values of liberal democracy are also European values. I do believe that MEPs have a role to play in this as well, and perhaps historically they haven't been so good at selling the message back home and being really visible and accountable, and so that's one pledge that I've made ever since I was elected, to be as visible and accountable as I can possibly be, which is why I do as many of these things as I can, no matter how exhausted I'm feeling. On the slightly less positive note, but I think it is important, we have to spell out the reality of what a no-deal Brexit and indeed any Brexit would mean. So one of the things I'm working on at the moment is a series of videos about the Brexit reality, specifically no-deal, things like the shortages of medical supplies, where I'm going around and speaking to people who already know that their lives are going to be affected by this, so that they're able to also tell their stories. So I'm trying to use my platform to make sure that those voices are heard, because there are real consequences. And I think sometimes when we just refer to headline statistics like it's going to be a 30 billion cost to the UK economy annually, yes, that's probably true, but it doesn't necessarily chime with people. But when you say actually people's health is at risk, there's going to be less food available and less choice for that, This is serious, and this is people's day-to-day, so we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to highlight that as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm really sorry, we're going to have to start wrapping up now. There's a few things I need to share with you all. I just want to thank you, everybody, first of all, for such a lively debate, and I'm only so sorry that we couldn't answer all of the questions, but it's great to see such a healthy kind of political spirit here. At this point, we would be making a message from our sponsor, but we don't have a sponsor. It's not true about George Soros. So as you leave, there's a wonderful gentleman with a beard over there called Martin. If you can make a donation, we like £50 notes, but whatever you can do works. Please do. If you can't make a donation, do the next thing. Please do sign up and be part of our group.
And sign up to unitetoromain.org also.
And I was saving that to last. I was saving that to last, but there we are. Sign up to unitetoromain.org. Did everybody get that? And we'll say that again at the end. If you don't live in Barnet, Joe was good enough to talk about the London for Europe site. Please go on there. Please go on the People's Vote site. Find out where you can get active. And just get out there and please do something. If you're in year 13 and you're going to be old enough to vote, make sure you're registered. Those were the key things. The only other thing I'd like to say, obviously, is thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for coming here and making it such a lively and informative debate. The people at East Barnet School, who we've promised will be out here by 10 o'clock, and they've got an assembly in the morning that we've got to get ready for, have been absolutely brilliant. So if any of you know them, please pass on our thanks. And obviously, and most importantly, I would like to thank these amazing guests who've given up their time. They don't slouch on the seats in Parliament. They actually work bloody hard. On Saturday, I was in Parliament Square volunteering, and both Luisa and Sian were up there, were standing. They've got party conferences coming up. They're working really hard for us. We're really proud and really honoured to have had them here. We wanted to think of something very Barnet to give them. And what we came up with, actually, not a lot of people know this, as Michael Caine once said, Barnet is renowned for bees and honey. Our local football team is called the Bees, and we've brought you some, we've had a beekeeping association here for over 200 years. So we've got you some Barnet, Barnet honey. It has bramble, it has blackberry, and a taste of the Great North Road. There we go. Brilliant. You're very welcome. So,
colours as well.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all, everybody, for your time. As I say, please come and see us in the way.